All right, so we're dealing with a weather phenomenon called El Nino. You've probably heard those words before in conversation with people about the weather. You may have heard the news talk about an El Nino event and how it's changing the weather patterns as far as rain and temperature and that kind of stuff. Well, El Nino takes place in the Pacific Ocean, in a big chunk of the Pacific Ocean in the southern hemisphere. And what's happening with El Nino affects the weather for basically the entire globe, especially on this half of it right here. And so the real question that a lot of people have is, well, they've heard about El Nino, they don't really know what it is and what's going on. Well, let me first tell you where El Nino happens very specifically. So right here we've got Australia. And on the east coast of Australia, we've got a whole bunch of islands. These islands right in this area are known as the Indonesian islands. So this is Indonesia essentially right in here. And then we go a little further east across the Pacific Ocean, we hit South America. And this coast of South America also deals a lot with El Nino, primarily this purple country right here, which is called Peru. And so on our little demonstration down here, we've got a little water basin that's got some clear water on the bottom. You can probably see it on the side. That represents the deep, colder ocean water. And then we've got a layer of vegetable oil on top of that that represents the warmer surface ocean water. And the surface ocean water is a lot like when you dive into a pool for the very first time in the morning. Like, no one's been in the pool yet, the sun's been shining on the pool for several hours, and you first get in, and those first several inches are a lot warmer than the bottom of the pool. That's basically what's happening in the ocean, and the first several feet of the ocean are a lot warmer than the deeper part of the ocean. And we're using vegetable oil to represent that because warm water is less dense than hot water, the same way oil is less dense than water. And so it tends to stay near the surface instead of mixing up in our small model. Now right here, we've got a piece of paper on this side which represents Indonesia, a piece of paper on this side which represents South America and Peru. Now normally, the wind, and this now we're getting into what El Nino is. The wind will blow across the ocean from Peru towards Indonesia, or from the east and towards the west. And the prevailing wind is called prevailing because it goes this direction almost 100% of the time. And so that happens because of the Coriolis effect and the spin of the earth and some other just wind patterns in general. And that's represented by this fan here. So I just turned it on, and I'm going to point the air so that it's blowing across the surface of the ocean. And as it blows across the surface of the ocean, if you look on the side, you can see that the oil is getting really thin down here by Peru and is getting really thick over by Indonesia. So the surface winds are actually pushing the warm water so that it's collecting over near Indonesia. And so what ends up happening is all of that warm water over on this side. Remember, earlier in our weather unit, we learned warm water evaporates easier. So it's putting all this humidity in the air right here near Indonesia. Now that humidity in the air creates more rain. And so Indonesia is very, very rainy year-round. And it's also got tropical rainforest kind of conditions, lots of forested areas in all of these islands. And this is what Indonesia is supposed to be like. That in turn makes it so that over here we have less warm water over by Peru, and because we have less warm water by Peru, the temperatures are a little cooler, there's not as much humidity right there on the coast especially, and so Peru is actually a lot drier. And Peru is actually more of a desert kind of region, desert area, not much vegetation. And that's what they're used to. This is normal for them. Now, something that we'll just talk about real briefly, as the water gets pushed from Peru towards Indonesia, you end up getting kind of a cycling of the water, and as water is pushed this direction, water from real deep near the Peru coast is forced upward from the depths of the ocean. This is called upwelling. And when that happens, it takes all the nutrients off of the ocean floor and puts them up into the ocean itself. And that feeds a lot of different types of plankton, phytoplankton, zooplankton, that kind of stuff, and that feeds fish. And so the fish population off the coast of Peru is always really, really high. And so Peru's economy is actually based on a fishing kind of economy. They have their culture is based around fishing just in general. So they go out, they catch fish, bring it back, get shipped worldwide. Indonesia, because it's so wet over here and they have a lot of forests, a lot of their economy is based on lumber. And so they cut down their trees, they make lumber, they ship it worldwide. This is normal. This is what's supposed to happen. Now this is what El Nino is. El Nino, because of differences in the way that the ocean ends up getting warmed up, ends up actually causing the air to weaken its wind, pushing towards Indonesia, or in some cases even reverse. And as the wind gets reversed, it pushes all that warm water away from Indonesia and towards Peru. And you can see the thicker oil or the warmer water kind of piling up over near the Peru side. And so what ends up happening is all of that moisture, instead of coming over near Indonesia, is actually going to start coming over here in Peru. And so we've got warm, moist air over here, which we associate with a lot of rain. And because Peru is not used to that kind of situation, it's very dry, there's not much vegetation, you end up getting a lot of mudslides and flooding, and it's just disastrous for the Peruvian people. In Indonesia, they end up getting what Peru used to have, very dry conditions, and they end up having a lot of forest fires and things of that nature. And then to make it even worse, the upwelling also reverses. Instead of happening over here near Peru, the upwelling happens over near Indonesia, and the fish end up populating the ocean near Indonesia. Well, Indonesia is not a fishing culture. They don't have the underlying, boat structure and facilities and things like that to do the fishing. They don't know what to do with it. These guys, they're not used to that kind of rain, and they don't have the vegetation to allow forests and things like that to start cropping up, and plus they wouldn't know how to start doing a timber if they had those forests. And so we have natural disasters, fish where they're not supposed to be, their economies are getting hurt, and everything's just not great as far as El Nino goes for this part of the world. And you'll actually learn a little later, you'll read about it in an article. El Nino actually means in the, I think it's Peru, a region, it actually means the Christ child. And it's linked to basically this idea that this disaster, it's linked to like some sort of prayer. They're hoping that it's going to get better if they pray that way. Now El Nino can last for months and even years at a time. And it can actually affect globally a little bit different. So as that warm water is getting pushed over this direction, you can actually start getting hurricanes, except they're not called hurricanes in this part of the world, they're called typhoons. And they'll actually start developing and start moving up and hitting Mexico in this region. It also causes in the northern American continent, aside from possible hurricanes hitting Mexico, it can reverse the conditions for Canada and the northern part of the United States. Canada is used to having relatively wet and warm summers, and the northern part of the United States is used to relatively dry summers. And it flip-flops that. All that moisture gets driven further south, and the northern part of the United States gets wet, and then the southern part of the United States also gets a little more moisture from it as well. And so it affects the northern United States a lot. Over here, flip across to this side of the world where we've got Japan and New Zealand and some of these other kind of countries, New Zealand's way down here, some of these other countries in the Indonesian area, they end up getting a lot more typhoons from this as well. And so it's affecting weather globally in this region. And so just remember that when we're talking about El Nino, it's not this mysterious like weather phenomenon. It's just in the South Pacific Ocean where the wind should be going this way, instead is blowing this way, and makes all of that moisture go over towards Peru where it shouldn't be, and then that moisture and that humidity ends up causing chain reactions to the rest of the world.